Hey, Buddy Melon here. Welcome back to another episode of Teardown. Today we're going to be tearing down the Arye Rcc-1. Now, the RCC-1, while it is one of the most ambitious releases of 2025, is unfortunately a very disappointing one, as the mouse is very underdeveloped and need another year or so in the R&D oven, so to speak, as there is a laundry list of issues with this mouse that would have been ironed out with some more R&D. But despite the mouse being overall a little disappointing, I did want to make this guide to show users how to clean their unit, as the open shell design makes this mouse very susceptible to dust and debris, and also to show people how to re-anchor their battery if it comes loose due to Arye's rather sketchy battery mounting mechanism on the inside, and also highlight some of the very questionable aspects of this mouse in terms of its design, and highlight how they could be improved on a future iteration of the RCC-1. And in addition to those topics, we're also going to talk about the RCC-1's modding options and individual component weights and much more in today's episode of Teardown. However, to tear down the RCC-1, we will need some specialized tools. The first of which is going to be a screwdriver set that is optimized for electronics repair. The reason you need this is because Arye decided to use Torx bits on the base of the RCC-1, which unnecessarily complicate the serviceability of this mouse, which is a very questionable decision given the open base design here. So you will need a screwdriver set that has a Torx bit. Now, most generic kits do include the proper size Torx bit, but if you need to purchase one for servicing the RCC-1, make sure you get one with a variety of sizes just so you have the proper bit. And next, having something to keep your mouse in place as you tear it down, such as a large mat or a soldering mat in this case, is advisable. Now, I like to use a soldering mat as it has built-in component storage and screw storage here, but you can use pretty much whatever you want. Just make sure you have some way to track the screws that come out of the RCC-1, as some of them are very specific and need to go back in specific spots, so make sure you have some way to track them so you don't mix up the screws on the inside. And once you have all these tools, you're ready to go ahead and tear down the RCC-1, so let's go ahead and get started. Alright, starting off, we're going to flip the mouse over, and if you have the stock skates on the mouse, you will need to remove them, as we need to remove 4 base screws, which are located here, 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 and here. So go ahead and remove your mouse's stock skates, grab your Torx bit, the same size as the one here, and go ahead and remove the base anchoring screws. Alright, and then once those are removed, go ahead and take your fingers and make a pincer like this, and you want to put pressure on both sides of the base shell here and here, just kind of on the seam. And with enough pressure, you can kind of see the back shell open up a little bit, and once it's open, you can take a fingernail or a pry tool, jam it in there to disconnect the back clip, and then you can run it along the sides of the shell to disconnect the remaining clips. Now, once the base shell is disconnected from the top shell, be very careful as there are some cables running from the top shell to the base here, so we'll need to remove those. The first of which is the battery connector, which you can just grab from the sides and pull out just like that. And then flipping the shell over, the next cable is a ribbon cable for the side button here, which we can remove by lifting up the sides of this connector, and then very gently pulling the cable out just like that. And then with those cables removed, that is how you disconnect the base shell from the top shell here on the RCC-1. Now I'm going to go ahead and put the base shell off to the side for now, and let's go ahead and disassemble the top shell first. Alright, now for the top shell, the first thing we're going to focus on here is the battery. Now, as I talked about in my full review, the battery is very loosely installed into the top shell here. As you can see, I can actually just pull it out of place with very minimal pressure, as the only thing that's holding this battery in place is these adhesive pads, which rest up against the PCB roughly here and here, and this pad of adhesive here. However, this entire piece of adhesive doesn't make contact with the top shell like you commonly see. As you can kind of guess by these imprints here, the only areas that actually makes contact with these 2 little ridges here and here. Now, this is without a doubt the worst battery anchoring I've seen in a mouse to date in my years of doing this, which is a very disappointing aspect to this mouse. And because of this adhesive being so minimal in terms of its contact area and the fact that it's exposed, this battery will likely come loose over time, which will likely cause balancing issues with the mouse, because as you can see here, the battery is the crux of the mouse's balancing, and it literally just fell out right there. So this is something to keep in mind, because if your mouse is unbalanced out of the factory, like some units have been, you'll need to manually reposition this battery. Now, to do this, what you need to do is you need to put the battery as centrally inside this little cage as you can. I like to use the main click screws as kind of a basis for this, as you want to install the battery in a way where it kind of covers both the click ends so you can't see them from the top shell, like this. Now, you need to be careful this battery sits properly both on the Y and X axis, as if it's positioned properly on the X axis but a little off on the Y axis, it will cause the shell to be a little left or right heavy. So you need to be very mindful of this. But if you do have a unit that is unbalanced out of the box, you can simply reposition this battery, flip the shell over, and test the weight balancing, and as long as it's balanced in the hand here, it will be balanced when you put the base shell back on, and that should fix that issue. Now, if you took the mouse apart just to fix its balancing or just clean the unit, you can go ahead and do whatever you need to do to the shell now, and then you can skip towards the end of this video to the reassembly segment where I show how to put these shells back together. But if you want to fully disassemble your unit or just want to see how the rest of the mouse is built, you can keep watching as we tear down the rest of the top shell here. Now, to actually take apart the top shell, we're just going to remove the battery real quick, which is again really easy to do. We'll put that off to the side, and then with the battery removed, we can remove a screw from here and a screw from here to disconnect the side button PCB. And then with those screws removed, we can just gently pull up the back of this PCB here and a little bit towards the front here. Just be gentle towards this front part because it is a little thin. You may have to twist the shell like this to pop it off of its standoff, and you can take the PCB out in one solid piece. Now, before we take apart the rest of the shell, I did want to highlight another issue area I have with this mouse, as this is the condition of the ribbon cable out of the box. Now, I've only taken apart this unit twice to date, and this is how bad the ribbon cable was when I first took the unit apart. Now, the reason for this is because this little PCB is jammed in the corner here, and then the battery is kind of just stuffed on top here as well. And then on top of that, it has to go into the top shell here, which means that this ribbon cable just kind of gets jammed into the corner here, which is a big issue as the potential for this cable to get damaged and stop working is very high in the current design. Now, thankfully, they are using a double-sided cable here, so if this cable does get damaged and isn't operable, you can just replace the cable. But this is another aspect to this mouse I think needs to be redesigned on a future iteration of the RCC-1, as this cable is in really bad shape for a factory fresh unit. Now, with the side button removed, we'll put that off to the side, and going back to the top shell here, now we can go ahead and remove the main clicks by removing a screw from here and a screw from here. And then with those two screws removed, go ahead and flip the shell over, and you want to put a little bit of pressure towards the bottom of the clicks here. And as you can see, that causes one of these clicks to pop out of the shell. Now, this should happen on the other click as well, but if it doesn't for some reason, you can just take the end of your screwdriver, put it in towards the back here, and just gently pull up on the back to disconnect the click out of the shell, just like that, and they'll come off in one solid piece. However, one noteworthy aspect about these clicks is they don't have that longer stabilizer towards the end of them. They're a little bit of a shorter, stubbier design, which is quite unique. Now, with the main clicks removed, we can now remove this central stabilizing structure here that goes on the inside of the shell. Now, this structure is actually what gives the shell its durability, as this kind of holds the two sides of the wall in, kind of similar to what we saw on the inside of the Sora V2 with that central support structure, just a little more fancier here on the RCC-1. Now, to remove this, you need to remove 4 screws, one here, 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 and here. Now, before we remove this, a quick note here. There are 2 sides of screws here, as these longer ones anchor towards the back of the shell, and these shorter, stubbier ones anchor towards the front. So make sure you keep these separated, as you don't want to mix these up, as these little screws will not properly anchor this towards the back. So make sure to separate these 2 screws and keep this in mind when we go to do the reassembly process so you don't put the wrong screw in the wrong hole. Alright, now that the screws are removed, we can go ahead and remove this structure here. Now, this structure actually anchors itself into the side shells here, meaning we're going to have to kind of pull the shells open to remove this. And the easiest way to do this is to put the shell like this, and while grabbing this support structure in the base here, and you can kind of push through the top of the shell to disconnect it, you want to hold this side of the shell open gently to disconnect it, and then you might have to do a little more towards the front here, and then the same thing on this side as well to disconnect it. And then once it's disconnected, gently pull out from the side shell to remove this central structure. And here on the side, you can see those little anchoring teeth that it kind of anchors into the side shell, and those kind of slot into their little ridges here and right here as well. All right, and then with this removed, we can go put this off to the side for now. And then lastly, for the top shell here, we can go ahead and remove the mouse's side buttons, which is quite easy to do, as you can just put pressure on the side buttons to push them into the shell. And then you just want to grab these little stabilizers towards the end here and just pull up towards the sides here, just like that, and the side buttons will come off in one solid piece. Now, a quick note about the side buttons here. As I talked about in my full review, they are definitely one of the most disappointing aspects to this mouse, and a big reason for this, in my opinion, is because they are hollow buttons, and the actual click contact isn't the buttons themselves, it's these little stabilizers towards the base of the stem, which is why I think the side buttons feel so weird, as while the side button switches themselves feel completely fine and feel the same as other mice who have used those switches, these buttons are the only oddity I can really isolate the issues to. So I would like like to see Arye maybe fill these buttons and change their positioning so the actual contact is the button itself, not the stem. I think that would make them feel a little better. But regardless of their interesting design, the side buttons are removable in one solid piece, which is nice to see. Alright, and then with the side buttons removed, that is everything for the top shell here of the RCC-1. We're going to put this off to the side for now, and now let's go ahead and take apart the base shell. Alright, now for the base shell here, this is going to be a much simpler disassembly process than the top shell, but I did want to highlight one potential avenue that Arye can fix their battery mounting, as the back area here of this rear base shell is pretty much completely empty aside from this milled out place at the bottom. So on a future iteration of the RCC-1, they could always take a smaller capacity or a smaller size battery and simply anchor it towards the back here. They would of course need to adjust the weight balancing of the front shell here to counteract this, but this is a potential fix they could do, as a battery mounted towards the back would be much easier in terms of serviceability and would make a lot more sense, a lot more in this interesting central balancing we talked about earlier. So that's something Arye could explore for their future iterations of the RCC-1, but this is something I wanted to mention in case you want to mod the battery here in the RCC-1, as you can position it towards the rear shell here. Just make sure to cover up this hole here so the battery's adhesive pad doesn't leak through the base, as that will collect dirt and debris inside this little hole here. But aside from modding options, let's go ahead and take apart this top shell, and we can do this by removing the main PCB, which is quite easy, as all we have to do is remove a screw from here, 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 and here. And then with the screws removed, we can just grab the PCB from the back and gently tilt it upwards and then pull it out of the front shell just like this. However, keep in mind that the USB-C port slightly protrudes from the front of the main PCB here, and that hooks into this little piece of plastic towards the front. So make sure when you remove the PCB, make sure to take it out at an angle, don't pull it straight up, as you need to make sure you don't damage that small little plastic piece here. Now, once the PCB is removed, we can also remove the scroll wheel, which is quite easy to do, as all we need to do is grab the wheel, pull it to the right to pull it out of the encoder, and it comes off in one piece here. So if you want to mod this battery up for one with a rubber texturing, it's a little easier to grip, you can do so quite easily. Now once the scroll wheel is removed, that's everything for the main PCB here, so we'll put that off to the side for now. And then lastly, for the base shell here, the only other thing we can do here is we can flip it over and press these little control buttons out of the bottom shell here, and we'll put those off to the side for now. We'll talk about reinstalling them later in this video. Alright, and now that we've disassembled the mouse, let's go ahead and grab our PCBs again and talk about the mouse's PCB layout and specs. Starting off, we have the mouse's battery, which is a 300 mAh battery, which uses a 1mm 3-pin JST connector. So if you plan on modding the battery here in the RCC-1, make sure you get one with the same size JST connector, as other sizes will not be compatible with the mouse. Moving over to our side button PCB, we have our TGC brown shell blue dot micro switches. These same micro switches used by Pulsar on the Crazy Light series and several of G-Wol's mice for their side buttons, which the switches themselves are completely fine in terms of their implementation. The issue with them again is the actual buttons themselves, as they're pretty poorly designed, but regardless, the side button PCB is well implemented. And again, as I mentioned earlier, the ribbon cable does get beat up pretty bad when it's installed due to how this cable runs, but thankfully this is a double-sided cable, so if the cable does get damaged, you can replace it. But again, this cable is another area they should probably rework on a future iteration of the RCC-1. And then for the main PCB, we have our Omron D2FP-F2N switches for the main clicks here. We have a Wano black shell blue dot switch here for the scroll wheel click, which is rather surprising, as I haven't seen this used since the Pulsar X2 series mice. We have a TTC gold 7mm dustproof encoder here for the scroll wheel, and for the sensor we have a PAW 3950 ES-King SKU, which is just a slightly modified 3950. And lastly, for MCU we have the Nordic 52840, the expected MCU type that we see paired with most 3950 implementations. Alright, and now that we've talked about the mouse's components and PCB layouts, let's go ahead and talk about component weights next. Now, a quick note here about component weights. Arye is advertising that this mouse in total is supposed to weigh 46 plus minus 1 gram, but as I talked about in my full review, the mouse's actual stock weight without any skates is 48.3 grams, 1.3 grams heavier than the max advertised weight spec, and the mouse gets even heavier when you add in the various types of the included stock skates, as the mouse with the skates will weigh anywhere from 48.6 grams to 50.3 grams depending on the type of skates used, which makes the RCC-1 weigh well outside its advertised weight spec, which is kind of confusing given all the weight optimizations that's been done to the mouse's shell. Now, in terms of the individual component weights, starting off with the top shell with everything removed from it, it weighs 14.9 grams. The base shell and its two control buttons weighs 5.4 grams. The scroll wheel weighs around 1.7 grams. The side buttons weigh 0.8 grams. Both of the main clicks weigh 3.8 grams. The central support structure for the top shell weighs 3.2 grams. The mouse's side button PCB and its ribbon cable weighs 1.2 grams, while the main PCB weighs weighs around 9.8 grams, which is definitely a heavier PCB implementation, and we've seen much lighter, more weight optimized PCBs on other mice, and this is definitely one area Arye could optimize for a future iteration of the RCC-1. The mouse's 300 mAh battery with its foam attachment and adhesive pad weighs 5.2 grams. And lastly, all the screws inside the RCC-1 weigh around 1.6 grams. Alright, now that we talked about component weights, let's go ahead and start our reassembly process, starting with the base shell. Now, a quick preface to this segment: due to all the unnecessary weight optimizations done to the base shell here, it is a little flimsy and it is very easy to warp. So when you reinstall the anchoring screws from the main PCB, make sure not to over tension them, as you can potentially cause the base to warp a little bit. So keep this in mind when we go to re-anchor the main PCB. But starting off with the base shell here, firstly what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and grab those two base control buttons we removed earlier, and we're going to go ahead and put them back into their little slots right here and here. You might have to fiddle with them a little bit to get them in place, and you can verify they're in place by flipping the shell over like this and making sure they show through the bottom just like that. Next, we can go ahead and grab our main PCB here. We can grab our scroll wheel, and you want to take the thin end of the wheel and put it into that little hole in the encoder so you can line it up and just gently push it into place just like that. And then we can take the PCB and reposition it in the base shell. But remember that the USB-C port protrudes from the front a little bit, so make sure to put it in at an angle. So we'll just go ahead, line this up, put it in at an angle as best we can, and roughly drop it into place just like that. And we can verify it's in place. As you can see, the plastic is kind of even with the PCB's height there. That's what you want it to look like. Now, before you do anything else, put your finger on the top, flip the shell over, and verify that these base buttons still function. And as long as they function, you're good to go. If they don't work, just reseed these buttons or reseed the PCB, and that should fix that issue. Once you've verified the base buttons are working, we can go ahead and re-anchor these screws for the PCB here. However, as I mentioned earlier, be careful not to over tension them because you could warp the base. So make sure you screw these in until you feel a little bit of feedback, and do not over tension them. Now, once these screws are installed, just to make sure the base isn't warped, go ahead and take the base and put it on something flat and move it side to side, and just make sure there's no wobbling anywhere on the base shell, but particularly towards the top region, as that's where the PCB is. If your base is a little uneven, untension the screws and retension them, and again, make sure not to over tension them. But with the main PCB reinstalled, that is everything for the top shell reassembly, a very straightforward and simple process, which is great to see. We'll put that off to the side for now, and now we can go ahead and start on the top shell reassembly. Alright, now for the top shell, the first thing we're going to do here in our reassembly is reattach the side buttons. Now we can do this by seeing that little nib towards the end of this little plastic piece towards the base here. These little standoffs go into these little slots that are right here and right here. So all you need to do is just roughly align the buttons into the side shell, push them into place, and once in place, the side buttons will just naturally fall into place, making this very, very easy. Next, we have to go ahead and re-anchor this central support structure. Now this is going to be a little trickier. As I mentioned earlier, see these little prongs or teeth on the side here? Those go into the little slots here and here, which makes this a little tricky, so you have to do this a little uniquely when you put this in. Now, the easiest way I found to put this in is to put this in at an angle, so you want to orient this side first, and then once you get it in place, you want to pull this side open like that, and then once it's in the shell, press down to clip it into place. Now you can verify this is properly installed. You can put pressure on the side shell, and the side shell won't have any kind of warping to it. Like, see, if you press up at the top, there's a little bit of warp. If you press towards the side here, it'll be kind of rigid. That means it's been installed properly. And you can also verify as the pilot holes are kind of level with the plastic shell here and here. Now, once this is installed and you verified it's in properly, you can go ahead and take your anchoring screws and re-anchor the support structure. However, as I mentioned earlier, remember that there are two different types of screws. These long ones go towards the back and the shorter, stubbier ones go towards the front. So make sure not to put the wrong screw in the wrong hole, as you will damage the top shell. Next up, we can go ahead and remount the main clicks, which is going to be quite easy to do, as all we do is put the clicks in through the bottom here, and see this kind of hollow part to the stabilizer there? That corresponds to this little standoff here. So you have to put the clicks in a way where that will go over, push them in, and then just press down with your thumb to anchor them into place. We'll do the same thing with this one. Now this one can be a little trickier because there's this kind of support bar here, which makes it a little harder to orient, but with a little bit of fidgeting, you should be able to get it into place, just like that. Now, next up, you can go ahead and re-anchor the screws here, but just like the screws we used on the main board, again, it's very important not to over-tension these screws, as doing so can damage your main clicks. So only screw these in until you feel a little bit of feedback from the screw. Do not over-tension them. And then once those are installed, just go ahead and check your clicks and make sure they have a natural buoyancy to them, both of which mine do. Now, they will be a little flatter in terms of their feeling right now, and that's because they're tensioned by the main PCB here. So don't worry, as long as your clicks just kind of have a natural buoyancy like that, they are in properly. And then with the main clicks reinstalled, we can now go ahead and remount our side button PCB, which is oriented like this with this kind of triangular part towards the front. Now, this PCB has to go in at an angle, so I'd recommend putting it in as best as you can like that. And then what you want to do is you want to line this PCB up with the little pilot holes here, and then once it's in place, you can press it down and you can verify it's in properly, as the plastic for the pilot hole is kind of flush with the PCB, just like that. And once it's in place, you can go ahead and re-anchor it. And then once the PCB is anchored, go ahead and just double check your side buttons still actuate, both of which mine do, so we are good to go. And lastly, we can go ahead and re-anchor the battery, which, as I mentioned earlier, you need to be very mindful doing, as this is the crux of the mouse's balancing. If you're going to mod the battery up for a different size one, I'd recommend installing it towards the base shell here. Yes, that will affect the balancing, but it's a much more consistent anchoring point than this one here. But regardless, you can take the battery and centrally position it. Again, you can kind of use the pilot holes for the main clicks as kind of a guide, and you want to position it in a way where you don't see those pilot holes, and make sure it's oriented properly on both the X and Y axis, and mine seems a little off, so I'm just going to gently move it over just a tiny little bit, test the weight balancing to make sure it's okay, and it's pretty good in my case, so we are good to go. All right, and then with the battery reinstalled, that is everything for the top shell reassembly, and now we can go ahead and reassemble the mouse. Alright, now to reconnect the top and base shells, this is going to be a pretty straightforward process. Firstly, we're going to grab the base shell and the top shell and kind of put them together roughly like this. And then you want to go ahead and re-anchor the mouse's battery, which you can do by just reconnecting it into its little plug here, just like that. And once you get it in, just gently push down on the sides, just like that, to reconnect it. And then we can flip the shell over, and we're going to open up this connector again into the open position like that. And then we're going to gently take this ribbon cable and feed it into the connector. And you want the cable to go all the way into the connector, just like that. And once it's in place, we can clip down the sides of this connector to anchor it into place. Now, before you put the shells back together, I'd recommend flipping the mouse over again, turning the mouse on, verify the mouse actually turns on, and check all the functions. So make sure the sensor works, make sure the side buttons work, just check everything works on the mouse. If for whatever reason your side buttons aren't working, the issue is most likely this connector here. So make sure just to reseat this side of the cable and the other side if you removed it, and then put it back in, and that should fix any issues you have with the side buttons. Now that's done, we can go ahead and re-anchor the shells. However, because of all the stuff here on this side of the shell, I did have a couple instances where for whatever reason, when I put the shells back together, the side buttons tensioning would get messed up and they become very heavy and very spongy. As such, you need to be quite mindful when doing this, and I recommend reconnecting this side of the shell first before you do the other sides, because for whatever reason, something inside here is affecting it. I'm assuming it's the battery cable, or maybe just the tensioning of these really big clips on the back, maybe messing with something. Something's causing this issue, I don't know what it is, but regardless, that's something to look out for. Now, to position the top and base shells, you want to orient the shells kind of in place like this. Now, a little cheat code you can do to make this really easy is you can actually anchor the base shell in first by clipping in the back, and then you can go ahead and clip in the front side here like this. And then once the side is connected, check the side buttons to make sure they're still light and they feel good. Again, if they feel very heavy and spongy, most likely something's interfering with it. So flip the mouse over, run your thumb or a pry tool along the sides to disconnect it. Take the shells apart, put them back together like this, re-anchor the back, like that, reconnect the sides, and just make sure they're still functional. And then once the side buttons are good, you can go ahead and clip this side in, just like that. And then once the base shell is connected, just do a once over of all the mouse's features again, and make sure you test the main clicks as well. Now, they might feel a little loose right now, and that's because the base shell isn't anchoring them in place. So if they feel a little loose, don't worry about that. They will fix themselves. Just make sure the main clicks work, make sure the scroll wheel works, and just recheck all the functions before you go ahead. But once you've verified everything is working, you can turn the mouse off and you can go ahead and re-anchor the base screws. However, interestingly enough, these screws aren't magnetic, as they won't stick to the end of a magnetized screwdriver bit, which I thought was kind of odd. I don't really know why they're not magnetic. Maybe they're made of aluminum or something, but regardless, you'll have to manually thread them. And then once they're installed, you can go ahead and anchor in the base screws. And then once the base screws are in, just run your thumb along the base shell to make sure everything made proper connection. Double check your main clicks and they should feel a little more tensioned now, which they are in my case. And then once that's done, you can go ahead and install your preferred set of skates. However, due to all the unnecessary weight optimizations that's been done to the base, its compatibility with aftermarket skates is pretty bad. So I'd recommend sticking with the full size or the half size skates that come with the mouse, or you can do some aftermarket skates. You just have to position them rather uniquely here on the base. But regardless, you can put your skates back on. And with that, that concludes our teardown of the Arye Rcc-1. Alright, well in closing, overall, while the Rcc-1 is serviceable, I use that word very loosely as again, the torque screws on the base are an unnecessary barrier to serviceability and these should absolutely be Phillips head screws on a future unit, especially considering the mouse's open shell design, as this makes cleaning the unit very difficult and makes the mouse much more prone to debris related mechanical issues. And of course, there are several internal design aspects of this mouse that should be revised on a future version, specifically the battery anchoring and the side button design, and hopefully on a future iteration of the Rcc-1 Air will continue to do some R&D and improve the various aspects of this mouse, as with a laundry list of fixes, this mouse could be very solid, but in its current state, it definitely feels half-baked as I mentioned at the top of this video, but we'll have to see what Air's plans are for the Rcc-1 in the future, and hopefully they can improve it on future batches. But with that, that is everything for today's episode of Teardown. Thank you very much for watching. If you enjoyed the video, be sure to leave a like on this video and get subscribed to the channel for more videos like this one, and a big thank you to all of our channel members who make what I do here on the channel possible. If you'd like to support videos like this one and everything else I do here on the channel, please consider becoming a channel member, as that is the best way to directly support everything I do here on the channel. And being a channel member gives you early access to all upcoming content here on the channel, such as videos like this one. So if you want to support what I do here with the Teardown project, my in-depth reviews, and see new content before anyone else, become a channel member today. But with that, that's everything for today's episode of Teardown, and I'll catch you all in the next episode. Peace.